Talks, presented by Sagicor Investments. All this and more, only on Nationwide 90 FM, the new revolution in media.
The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans for justice. The people's champion. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, the people demand. Right to life and security. Oh, what a joy. Oh, what a peace. How great this country could be. Respecting your rights. Respecting human rights.
Happy Monday. It's a beautiful Monday here in Kingston. We're certainly happy to be here, and we're happy, and we say thanks to our usual listeners for joining us in company and in advocacy every week here on Nationwide 90 FM for the JFJ's Let's Start Justice radio show. My name is Michael Jackson, Executive Director of JFJ.
And I'm Jade Williams, Policy Advocacy and Research Manager at JFJ.
All right, so where do we start?
I think we can do the week that was.
Alrighty. But just for those who are joining us, we're going to be discussing a constitutional provision that we have here in Jamaica, the right to a speedy trial. And we're going to be talking to attorneys at law, Clyde Williams, as well as John Clark, who is also the chair of JFJ. But before we get into today's topic, there are two items from the week that was, and I think one of them, it's important that I address it head on, if you will. So over the weekend, video clippings emerged from the media houses where the Police Federation chair made some comments regarding JFJ's planned protest, as well as the concerns that we have raised about the alarming increase in police fatal shootings since the start of the year, and certainly the trend that we have been observing for the past 3 or 4 years. Not only did the Police Federation chair made her criticisms, but she went as far as labeling the organization as a terrorist one. Now, the comments are deeply disappointing, inappropriate, reckless, and the comment itself is an unintelligent one because it undermines the principles of democracy, wherein organizations like a human rights one can levy reasonable criticisms against the police force in light of the alarming numbers that we have flagged. Now, this type of characterization of a human rights organization, as I stated earlier, it's deeply troubling because when these things happen, what results is not the type of dialogue that one would want, as the Police Federation chair called for. What it results in, as has happened in the recent past, you have callers calling the organizations, making threats against the lives of our staff members. And I'm not sure, and I doubt that was the intent of the Police Federation chair. But words have consequences. And I would urge the Police Federation chair to be mindful of the consequences that her words would carry. Now, JFJ, we celebrated 25 years last year as a non-profit, non-partisan organization focusing on police accountability. And part of that would include the calls that we're going to be making at that protest. The numbers are there. 165% increase compared to the corresponding year last year when you're talking about police fatal shootings. And with that in mind, we have been calling for body-worn cameras. We have been calling for a timeline within which the data storage infrastructure would be in place to ensure that we can have increased deployment of the body-worn cameras. We have been calling for systemic reforms to be made. For example, reducing the delays and the time that it would take for families of state killings to get justice. We look at what is happening with Mario Dean now, 10 years before the trial went underway, and we have several other cases where over a decade has passed and the family has still not realized justice. We don't shy away from those calls. And to attack a human rights organization on the basis of making those calls, again, unfortunate. To be using the language of terrorist, that language is an unintelligent and reckless one. And we would urge the Police Federation to do better. Since the start of the year, the organization has trained over 100 police officers. We just concluded 2 town halls trying to improve the relations with the police and citizens, educating citizens about their rights and responsibilities. So JFJ, we're very comprehensive in our approach. But labeling us as terrorist organization will not result in us shying away from our mandate. And I've said this before, we stand firm in our purpose. Criticisms can be made, but they must be made responsibly. That is what I would urge the police, not the commission, my apologies, the Police Federation chair to do. Responsible criticisms if you're going to be making them. All right? But again, we look forward to dialogue, just the same. And just as though the Police Federation is urging for dialogue, our offices remain open. You can send me an email at admin@jamaicans4justice.org, or you can call the office to the Police Federation. Share the numbers there, 755-4524. We look forward to conversations with you. But the words were reckless and we would urge you to do better. All right?
Thank you for that, Mikhail. All right, so our major topic for today is right to a speedy trial. So we will be joined, as Mikhail had said, by attorneys at law Clyde Williams as well as attorney at law John Clark. We have a did you know and a trivia question in line with our topics for today. So we can look at or did you know first? So our did you know for today speaks to our judicial conduct guidelines, and those guidelines establish a framework for judges to maintain integrity, impartiality, and dignity in their roles. So these guidelines apply to all judges, including those at all levels of the court, so Supreme Court, Parish Court, as well as the Court of Appeal. Now, these provisions would allow for judges to have high standards of conduct. So, for example, it would instruct them not to speak, not to be swayed by partiality or by influence, for efficiency and promptness to ensure that written judgments are provided in a timely manner so that persons are able to effect their appeals or to know why the court came to the decisions that it came to, and transparency and communication as well. So those are our judicial conduct guidelines. We also have a trivia question for today, and that trivia question is, which Jamaican legislation was enacted to improve case flow and reduce delays in the criminal justice system by encouraging plea bargaining? So essentially, which legislation speaks to plea bargaining in Jamaica? But the purpose of that legislation would be to reduce delays in our criminal justice system and encourage that plea bargaining. So you can send a response in the chat on Nationwide's YouTube channel or JFJ's YouTube channel, as well as 2397583 via WhatsApp. The first correct answer wins.
All right. So very important discussions to be had. Talking the right to a speedy trial. Do we now have our guest on? We have our board chair.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we are joined by our board chair and attorney at law, John Clark. Good afternoon, Mr. Clark.
Good afternoon, and thanks for the invite.
Thank you so much. Um, Mr. Clark, before we start, there is a public statement, and I think it would be remiss of us if you could put in context for the listeners. There are comments about the organization being a terrorist one, and you know that we all support law and order here at JFJ. It's our mandate, and we welcome the reduction in the murder statistics that we're seeing. So welcome one. But as you know, Mr. Clark, we have to balance it with accountability. So I'm not sure if you're in the position to just issue a few seconds on behalf of the organization.
Well, I was surprised to hear the organization being compared to a terrorist organization, especially from a law enforcer who should know better in relation to what really is the definition of what would fall within the definition of a terrorist. It is a comment that can put all the hard-working men and women in our organizations' lives at risk. And we would hope that the persons who are trained in relation to how to interact with the public will not be causing our own interactions to be unduly troublesome because of false allegations that are baseless and without any support in law. In fact, I know that the chairwoman of that very good federation is a very intelligent woman. So one would hope that her comments were made without being recorded. That is, it was not pre-planned, and that the comments are regretted, and that in time she will come to indicate to the nation that perhaps she misspoke on this occasion, because to compare us to a terrorist organization is a very concerning thing, and one wonders if the mere disagreement with law enforcers or merely pointing out areas in which we may not see eye to eye would lead to the organization being classified as a terrorist, because that is very, very concerning on so many levels.
Thank you so much, Chair. Appreciate it. We're going to have to take the break, and then when we come back, we discuss such an important constitutional right, one that I know that you're personally passionate about. We take the break.
The Jamaica 4-H clubs will have their Youth in Agriculture show on Wednesday, April 16, 2025 at its Denby Centre, Clarendon, under the theme Shaping the New Face of Food. The Youth in Agriculture Expo will bring hundreds of young innovators, agricultural enthusiasts, and stakeholders to showcase their skills and knowledge. This National Achievement Expo is the 4-H flagship event, highlighting the remarkable achievements of our youth in agriculture, home economics, environmental conversation, and leadership. Come out and support the Youth in Agriculture show on April 16, 2025.
Big news! The Big Bite Food Safety Show now airs on Nationwide 90 FM with your host, Alison Richards, the Food Safety Girl. Join Alison every Tuesday from 1 to 2 p.m. as she serves up expert advice, tips, and insights on everything food safety. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and remember, food safety is everybody's business. Don't miss a bite of the action. Tuesdays at 1 p.m. only on Nationwide 90 FM, the new revolution in media. Join us on the next episode for Street Food Chronicles. Are you being jerked over?
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We're about to get into our major discussion on right to a speedy trial. We're currently joined by Attorney at Law and JFJ's Board Chairman, Mr. John Clark. Before the break, Mr. Clark, you gave a quick comment, so we just wanted to move quickly into the major part of the conversation. Firstly, for our listeners, if you could clarify what right to a speedy trial are we talking about? Where do we find that? What does that mean in our context here in Jamaica?
Butcher?
Or the right to a speedy trial, or as our constitution calls it, which is the right to trial within a reasonable time, is a constitutional guarantee that is contained within our constitution. But what it really and it can be found if one wants to find it at section 14.3 of our charter, which says any person who is arrested or detained shall be entitled to be tried within a reasonable time. This right to a speedy trial, on the other hand, is just a procedural um, enactment which ensures that time limits are set for the prosecution of matters in Jamaica to ensure that this right to a trial within a reasonable time is actually implemented and provided to our citizens. Whilst I'm speaking to you, there is a person who's detained in our prison for more than 15 years without his case ever being tried in a Jamaican court. No, that would therefore mean that his right to trial within a reasonable time, on the face of it, would have been breached. Now, in America, in 1974, that enacted the Speedy Trial Act, and the Speedy Trial Act is one legislative mechanism that applies to all states in which time limits are set for federal criminal prosecution in the United States. And why this is important is that all state actors know that they must complete their actions within a certain time period, and that the failure to do that may very well result in the matter not being allowed to proceed within our system. This is necessary both for the protection of victims and for the protection of accused, because the purpose of a trial is to really determine who is guilty. And the best way that we have realized to determine that is by a trial within a reasonable time, which would allow the facts of the allegations to be properly examined and those who are incarcerated to have their day before the court within the shortest possible time. In Jamaica, I don't know if your listeners can recall, there was a time not too long ago when our Chief Justice in Trelawney had to ensure matters were disposed of when the accused person, the system had to be waiting for more than 12 months to get a simple report,
Yes.
which was crucial to the Crown's case. And what we're hoping by an examination into these issues that the relevant state actors examine what resources do court reporters need, what resources do the police need, what resources do the cyber crime unit in the JCF need to ensure that time limits that are important to the timely disposition of these cases can be implemented and can be realized.
You know, you said something, Mr. Clark. An individual has been behind bars, imprisoned, incarcerated for 15 years, still awaiting trial.
Yes.
If you could just explain to our listeners what that entails. You are accused of a crime, you were charged, but you're still awaiting trial. That's pre-trial detention. How many such cases are you aware of exist? And is that 15-year the worst of the numbers that we're seeing in terms of length of time? What is the average years that you find that people have been placed on pre-trial detention, awaiting for their matters to be adjudicated and nothing is happening?
Well, in reality, no. I think the Chief Justice has done a beautiful report, and I think his report in relation to the matters with our court should be compulsory reading for anybody who is concerned about the operations of our court. And it's a very beautiful initiative. That is a data that examine what is happening within our system. Now, the 15-year period, I have not met anybody else who has been in custody for as long a period as that gentleman. But that 15-year period is concerning because he's in custody, sharing a cell with two other males. In the cell, they don't have access to toilets. He's on lockdown for close to more than 23 hours each day. He does not have access to water. He has not been convicted of a crime. So he's only awaiting his trial in relation to accusation of a crime. He has can't play football, can't exercise, doesn't have any of the basic minimum conditions that prisoners are supposed to have. He eats the same place where he sleeps. As it relates to disposing of his human waste, and really when he has to defecate or urinate, he indicates that there's no toilet in the cell, so he has to defecate sometimes in a scandal bag, and that scandal bag would stay with him in the cell until he's flied up in the morning for about, luckily for 20 minutes each day to dispose of that scandal bag with his human waste and the bottle which they call a piss girl, piss gal in fact, in which his urine is held. So he has to bear the smell of his own urine and his own human increments for a period of more than 20 hours each day. And when he's able not to pass his own increment, he shares cell with two other males. And those persons may have also passed their own urine and their own human waste. And he has to smell that. So it's not a condition which it's a condition that can be described as inhumane.
Yes.
But it's a condition that he has to endure for 15 years. The conditions of our prisons are notoriously inhumane, and something that is very, very concerning.
Yes. You know, it's such. We had other attorneys here several months ago, Matthew Hyatt and others, who were describing, you know, the conditions of the lockups and the prisons. And each time I hear attorneys speak, it's so horrific. And the listeners are listening in and they're of the view that, you know, these people commit some murderous act and therefore somehow prison are a bed of roses, as they're saying, Mr. Clark, and we shouldn't be expecting them to be living a life of luxury. How do you respond to that before we move on to other systemic delays?
Well, the main thing is that this is pre-trial detention. Because it's pre-trial detention, this gentleman has not been convicted. And I've known of cases where persons would have spent 10 years in custody. And after the trial actually comes up for hearing, the witness would come in the box and say, but I didn't do an ID parade. The person before me is not the man who committed the crime. I don't know that man. And in such a scenario, that person may very well walk after 10 years with an apology saying, oh, we're sorry, this is wrong, man. And there are also cases that we may know of. In fact, one of them is Lucine Edwards, in which she was incarcerated for a lengthy period of time, more than 8 years. And after the 8 years, forensic evidence that was examined by the Privy Council, which demonstrated that the same person he was accused of killing committed suicide, and as such, he was wrongfully incarcerated. We must never forget that when persons are accused of a crime, it's not like we have a very deliberative process by which persons we examine the allegation before persons are charged. Any listener can be charged because their neighbor goes to a police and say, "Oh, I saw Mass Thomas doing X," and just a mere allegation can cause you to be transformed from a mere citizen into a prisoner, and then to be endure these conditions for a period of more than 2 years. So accusations alone do not necessarily mean that you are guilty of a crime. And that is why we have a trial process to fairly determine where guilt or innocence lie. And even after the trial process, mistakes can be made because in the Lucine Edwards case, he was convicted at the trial process. And it was only when his case went to England that the forensic experts were able to look at the material that were in Jamaica and say that Jamaica's scientific scientific process were decades behind where the world is, and that having examined everything, having examined the blood spatter, it is quite clear that this woman who is accused of murder actually committed suicide.
So the forensic needs improvement, yeah.
I mean, yeah, as you mentioned that the forensics, I know that one of the challenges we've even seen with, for example, Indicom completing an investigation even, is the labs and things related to labs, ballistics, etc., etc. Do those things continue to affect our pre-trial periods, and what other factors have led to these delays in our pre-trial periods?
Well, those are issues with forensics and scientific material and pay for persons who carry out these task on behalf of us have long been a systemic issue in relation to how timely our matters are resolved. But one of the things that I would hope would happen, especially if our parliament were to debate implementing a law which would set time limits for prosecution, would be that all the relevant state actors, um, including the persons from the cybercrime unit, would be invited to Parliament whilst we explore what are the causes of delay and what time limits can be put to remedy these causes, and what resources need to be reallocated to ensure that we can actually achieve justice in a timely manner. It's important to note that when anybody examines the expenditure in the Ministry of National Security and compare it to the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Justice is a very distant cousin in terms of our effort to really rid this country of crime. And whilst it's important that the police need to do their work, we see the results in terms of a reduction in crime. Whenever the police arrest somebody, that person is brought before the court, and if our justice sector is not fit in for form and unable to timely try these persons, then what will inevitably see happening that after the police do their work, persons will invariably have to be released, or maybe released because we have insufficient resources to properly prove scientifically where justice lies.
Mr. Clark, we have to take the break again. Nationwide, they have bills to pay, and we have to respect that. So if you could stay with us for a few more minutes, and then we can pick up with some other critical discussions, please.
At the Jamaica Customs Agency, we care for our employees, customers, stakeholders, citizens, and our country. Customs cares. The temperature by the Jamaica Customs Agency is
31 degrees Celsius here in Kingston and 30 out west in Montego Bay.
The Jamaica 4-H clubs will have their Youth in Agriculture show on Wednesday, April 16, 2025 at its Denby Centre, Clarendon, under the theme Shaping the New Face of Food. The Youth in Agriculture Expo will bring hundreds of young innovators, agricultural enthusiasts, and stakeholders to showcase their skills and knowledge. This National Achievement Expo is the 4-H flagship event, highlighting the remarkable achievements of our youth in agriculture, home economics, environmental conversation, and leadership. Come out and support the Youth in Agriculture show on April 16, 2025.
Some dreamers picture a place they call home, a house with no mortgage, a home that they own. Some dream of owning their very own store, meet a cafe or florist, or growing one into more. Where one dreams of making luxury shopping the norm, others dream of sports cars, the kind that perform. But one thing in common these dreamers all need is to build their wealth so they can achieve.
Never settle for less than your dreams with Sagicor Investments. Call 888-SAGICOR to speak with a wealth advisor.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We are joined by attorney at law, John Clark, discussing, an alarming issue here, judicial lethargy, if you can call it that. Slow pace of our justice system. People ultimately being denied justice. Not just the accused, but importantly, the victim. Mm-hmm. And, as Mr. Clark was speaking, and JD and I had this discussion briefly, about the case in Trinidad. A young lady was raped at age 16 by her football coach. The matter wasn't heard until about 2022. And the courts there ruled on the matter that, her right to a speedy trial was breached. Mm-hmm. But when it advanced to their court of appeal, the court of appeal said, no, You have no such constitutional guarantee here in Trinidad. But, this particular case really brings home how victims are also affected by the slow pace of justice. So it's just a perspective for us to be looking at, Mr. Clark and listeners. I'm not sure if you have any opinion on how victims that you've come across, Mr. Clark, how they are affected in this. Again, not just from the perspective of the accused and just the broader importance of judicial reform and justice, but how are victims affected in this particular instance? Mr. Clark?
Yes, I'm hearing you, but the when you use the word victim, I had to go back to my dictionary to try and see how we define the word victim.
Yes.
And I think Merriam-Webster dictionary defines as one that is acted or usually adversely affected by a force or agent. And sometimes when we hear criminal allegations, one of the key thing that we always do, we always say believe persons who make allegations. And in some cases, we always, as a society, do that. But in some scenarios, that belief can also cause another person to also be victimized. Because let us say, Michael, that I am malicious and I tell a malicious liar, Michael, that Michael does something that Michael doesn't do. Then Michael, unfortunately, is in prison because of my malicious lie. If Michael is truly innocent, then she herself becomes a victim. Because what you have is that she becomes adversely affected by my lie. And then if Michael is detained for 10 years, 15 years, then we have other victims being created, persons being adversely affected by the chain of reaction. So the purpose of a trial, and trials in the olden days used to be kept even the very day or days after the incident, is to try and ferret out the truth, to try and have a fair methodology to determine who exactly is a victim and who exactly is the is the criminal convict. And if we're taking too long to carry out that process, we'll have scenarios where persons are wrongly accused or in custody for a lengthy period of time and then just released without more.
Yes.
And we cannot have a country like that.
Yes. I've listened to Minister Chuck, and he has personally spoken about, reaching to a point where we can have matters tried within a 12-month period. But unfortunately, what we have not heard from Minister Chuck is the legislation that you spoke of that will put this in statute, that these are the obligations of the state. And if it is that these matters are not tried within a reasonable time, whatever that reasonable time is, whether it is the 12 month or otherwise, what that will mean for people's lives being hung in the balance, so to speak. So what would be your call, Mr. Clark, to Minister Chuck, who have made that, appeal, but it has not yet gotten to a point where we've heard anything that he's going to be putting together a cabinet proposal and then anything moving towards a legislation? What would be your appeal, Mr. Clark?
Well, my appeal would be for him to examine our call in relation to the need for Jamaica to have its own equivalent of a Speedy Trial Act, to examine the Chief Justice's own action over the period of the last 4 years, to try and set procedural timelines for which certain things should be completed. In fact, I believe in their own report, they have a period of 24 months being a case being in delay, and then to make a determination whether or not it wouldn't be in the best interest of victims, I'm going to say victims, accused, and the system itself to have a timeline within which prosecution should be completed. I think what's important to note for listeners is that this timeline doesn't mean that if, for example, the period is 5 years and within the 5 years is not completed, that a prosecution cannot be continued after the 5 years. But what it would mean is that the judge would have to get very cogent reasons to allow the prosecution to continue after that period of time. And ultimately, it would allow state actors to organize themselves to ensure that ultimately we don't have a repeat of a situation where a Jamaican citizen is in custody for more than 15 years before the trial actually started. That is very, very concerning. And I believe anybody who's listening should appreciate that it can happen to them, it can happen to their family members. And we can't have a system in which a person can spend such a lengthy period of time and not be concerned about that.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Clark. I do think that was fairly comprehensive.
So I guess we'll just ask if there's any last words on the issue, an appeal to the listeners, or anything else that you believe that we didn't touch before we close out.
Well, what I can say in closing is that justice delay is justice denied and can be denied to the true victims and can also be denied to the accused men themselves, who may very well be looking forward to have the matter tried to prove their innocence. Because ultimately, I'm aware of scenarios in which matters are not tried on their merits, and you have persons who are accused that they would have preferred the matter were tried because ultimately it would allow them to quote unquote prove that they're really innocent of this heinous accusation.
Thank you so much. That was Attorney at Law John Clark and our board chair here at JFJ. Thank you so much, Mr. Clark. Always have a good day.
Thanks for the invite. All right.
As I was listening in, Jade, one of the things I would urge, and I see some of the comments in the chat. Others we will talk with our listeners in a few. That one of the critical components of our Constitution is the presumption of innocence.
Yes.
And Mr. Clark spoke about that well. And once you're accused of a crime, you do have, in my humble opinion, even if it weren't in the Constitution, it's a human rights principle that you can't be accused of a crime, and again, because of hiccups, whether the state being under-resourced or simply don't have their house in order, that you can have an individual being on pretrial detention 5 years, 10 years, 15 years in that inhumane condition of our lockups and prisons. I think we have to do better.
Yeah. But even as we look at that, we also have to look at how that kind of maladministration would affect the ability to do other cases. You don't have the space to arrest anyone else because your lockup is full of pre-trial detainees who are waiting on their trial, right? They're waiting for years and years and years.
And unfortunately, they're not saying that they don't have the space and building more.
Right.
You're just putting in more and making laws that would just make the problem far worse.
But, it is also that we might skip over a more minor offense or so because we simply know that we don't have the space.
So the Bail Act with the pre-charge detention will make this problem far worse. And then when you look, for example, at the mandatory minimum sentence proposals coming from our Minister of Justice, that was last year, the year before, we need to rethink. And, again, I was quite heartened when I heard our Minister speaking about, having the matters tried within a 12-month period, because that's where we need to go. Matters must be adjudicated timely so that justice can be realized for all. All right, so I see some comments in the chat. There are two things I wanted us to touch on, Jade, before the end. So the Integrity Commission and the political ombudsman issues. So just remind ourselves to touch on those matters before we close out.
Sure.
But I see some comments in the chat labeling JFJ and myself in particular as somehow political. Now, no one here knows my political suasion, who I vote for, and I've been voting since age 18. The organization is a non-partisan one. And I would want to urge us to, and I've said this before, level our thought process. It cannot be that you have a human rights organization doing its work, and because of its work, you're going to be labeling the organization as somehow political. Let me tell you this. If the People's National Party were to form government, they wouldn't like some of what we're saying either.
And no government likes what a human rights organization has to say.
And we were labeled as JLP while the PNP
Was in
power. Because remember, the organization was formed in 1999.
Yes.
That was during the PJ Patterson era.
And all of that time when we were holding governments accountable, it would have been a different government.
Yeah, so let's move beyond that type of rhetoric. You know, so nothing that we've said before, you know, not even an iota of political bias. We speak non-partisan. We are apolitical as an organization. Our individual political views have no place in how we do our work. And I would challenge our listeners to understand the role of human rights. And even we've gone down this kind of thinking and conversation with our listeners. And I'm going to be addressing some of the other comments. And the thing that we say on our website, Jade, if a citizen kills another citizen, you know who to call. The police. That's why they're there. But if it is the police who is the perpetrator, who do you call? Others would say Indicom. It's advocacy that led to the establishment of Indicom.
Yes.
And even with Indicom, there's still some systemic issues that we need to address, which is why JFJ remains quite relevant in the work.
You know what's funny, Michael? As we have seen a lot of recent negative commentary, our offices remain full. Phone calls, complaints come in every single day of these same issues that we are being cursed out for representing people on. At the end of the day, it cannot be that all of the citizens of Jamaica are of this view, or we would get no calls and we would receive no complaints and we would have none of these issues to speak to.
We're denying the experience of people.
Constantly.
Let's take the break and then we'll pick up with some of the comments.
Is your business tax compliant? At Dodge & Global, we take the stress out of tax planning, ensuring you maximize deductions and minimize liabilities. From corporate tax to VAT compliance, we've got you covered. Call 876-929-3670 or 876-926-5210. Email us at info@dodgen.global. Visit us at dodgen.global. Dodge & Global, your tax experts.
The Jamaica 4-H clubs will have their Youth in Agriculture show on Wednesday, April 16, 2025 at its Denby Center, Clarendon, under the theme Shaping the New Face of Food. The Youth in Agriculture Expo will bring hundreds of young innovators, agricultural enthusiasts, and stakeholders to showcase their skills and knowledge. This National Achievement Expo is the 4-H flagship event, highlighting the remarkable achievements of our youth in agriculture, home economics, environmental conversation, and leadership. Come out and support the Youth in Agriculture show on April 16, 2025.
Nationwide 90 FM will be broadcasting live from the National Achievement Expo on Wednesday, April 16 from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Join us at the main stage, Denby 4-H Center in Clarendon, for a premier youth and agricultural event celebrating innovation and leadership. Under the theme, Youth in Agriculture, Shaping the New Face of Food. The expo highlights the outstanding achievements of Jamaica's youth in agriculture, home economics, and environmental stewardship. Come and see the youths of Jamaica who will be steering agriculture in the right direction. That's a live outside broadcast at the main stage, Denby 4-H Center in Clarendon, Wednesday, April 16. It's the National Achievement Expo. Catch the live stream on Nationwide's YouTube channel at Nationwide 90 FM Live 2. All this and more only on Nationwide 90 FM, the new revolution in media. This broadcast is brought to you by the Jamaica 4-H Club.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice, and we're just reading some of the comments from, for example, St. John, quoting a section from the Bible. Here is the name of this person in the chat. Now, let me say this. When the crime rate is reduced, clearly we all benefit from a safer Jamaica. And that is something that we all want. But it should never be a trade-off where there may be circumstances where the police acts outside of the law or use excessive force. One of the things we've always articulated, that every case and incident must stand on its own merit. But in 2025, and if we look at the trend that we're seeing, if we recognize that we're a lawful democratic country, and we look at the trend, the numbers, and where they're going, if we exceed 250 people being killed, 300 reach that number, we're going back to the 2000s. The last time we saw numbers exceeding 300 people killed by the state was in 2010. You had high numbers, and then you had Tivoli incursion happening as well. The numbers themselves call for greater scrutiny, which is why we've said the body-worn cameras are important. Calling for greater scrutiny should never be seen as somehow anti-police, because we need the best version of our police officers. And I urge you to follow us on our social media pages. In the coming days, we're going to be sharing the statistics. We're also going to be sharing incidents that have caused us to have some concern. For example, Romario Sterling, that was 2023? The man was shown on video appearing to kneel down, appearing to have his hand behind his head, and then what sounded like a gunshot was heard, and it appeared to be an extrajudicial killing. That was Romario Sterling down by Bugwalk. And you've had incidents wherein there are conflicting accounts between the police and citizens. So I just want to say there's no hatred of our officers. We stand with our men and women. We're proud of them when they win. We want them to, but we also want greater levels of accountability. So I just wanted to put that in context. And also, Jade, if you remember the Indicom report last year, ending the quarter, 189 incidents of fatal shootings, and 9% or 18 involved non-firearm weapons like machetes and so on. 24 or 13% had no firearm or any weapon whatsoever. And I believe about 15% included persons with varying mental illness. And while the police had to act in some of those incidents, the question is what other mechanism could have mitigated it? Community-based mental health response, for example, is something for us to look at. So again, we're going to be looking through some of those systemic issues, and our planned protest will address it. You're welcome to join us if you so desire, but it should never again a call for accountability be seen as an attack on our law enforcement. Quite the contrary.
I think as Jamaicans, we need to be critical in how we negotiate our rights. As we've seen in other countries like the United States, where a lawful citizen can be labeled a criminal and extradited from a country that they live and have citizenship in, should be concerning to us when we look at the way that we have chosen to negotiate our rights here. And I just want to say, as we have continued to have discussions about our national security and our safety and public safety, that we remember that when you give up rights and privileges, they are not returned. When you give up rights and privileges, you have lost them. And therefore, you will not be able to rely on those same rights when you are in need of them. So I just ask our listeners to consider these things as we continue to fight for a safer country.
All right. So, but we continue the discussions. We live in an environment where the murder rates are reducing, but people are still fearful, and we want to see the numbers reduced to something that we can say our country is safe. So we will continue to have meaningful dialogue with our listeners. And I would ask that we be respectful in the calls and the comments on the chat. I remember seeing one comment on Instagram, Jade, that we stand for law and order, but you must be stoned in half a tree. And I don't think that particular social media user recognized the contradiction in such a statement.
Yes.
But, I've always said, our rights are hard fought, but easily lost.
Indeed.
Because I think quite a bit of the generation, we grew up seeing our rights secured. So it's so easy to negotiate it away. And it goes back to, again, the concept of civics in schools.
Indeed.
Because I don't think we understand and appreciate, but yeah.
But we'll also continue to partner with our JCF partners. As you would have mentioned earlier, we've done several trainings since the beginning of the year. We've done our police and citizen relations town hall.
And you were lauded, by the way, the team.
Yes.
Because we had a post... post-project reception.
Yes.
And you heard from the UK High Commissioner, Judith Slater, who was here with you. And we were having that reception, and one of the police officers who you trained, Jade, spoke highly of the organization. So continue to do the good work.
Yes, we
and
will.
again, my urging to the staff and other human rights advocates, remain firm in your purpose. But let's switch gears a bit. Integrity Commission, news just in. I'm being like the journalist, channeling George Davis and Ricardo and so on. News just in. So there is a response from the Integrity Commission to Parliament. If you remember that there were concerns recently flagged about an individual who was promoted to act in the capacity of Director of Corruption Prosecution with the departure of Kamika Prince. Mm-hmm. And we saw Greg Christie saying that he will not return. He opted not to. Mm-hmm. And we know that Justice Panton also departed. And, matters of conflict of interest and so on were raised. And we can be balanced, I think, as a country, as we view some of these things. And I won't speak on that particular issue. Mm-hmm. But Integrity Commission responded to indicate that they're open to dialogue with the members of the Houses of Parliament. It's a 2-page letter, so it's too much for me to fully glean what is being said here. But I know Nationwide will fulsomely deal with the matter later on. But the thing I would say about the Integrity Commission, very quickly, is that we, want to acknowledge the good work of its former executive director. Well, he has 1 month left, so I won't say former, but outgoing executive director, Greg Christie. And just the words that he noted, that in these types of positions, again, you have to remain fearless but fair in how you do your work. So we say thanks to Greg Christie. And the last thing from me, Jade, the political ombudsman, we saw a report from the Jamaica Gleaner with Cafe speaking about reinstating the political ombudsman. And we also join in that call because far too many things are happening in the political season now, and you don't hear the political ombudsman, which is now subsumed within the Electoral Commission, making any statements at all, publicly that is. So we don't know if the code of conduct is being enforced. The lack of public statement itself really brings into question again whether or not that particular component is functioning. And I think it's important for trust and transparency for that to be done. And I join the call on behalf of JFJ for the political ombudsman to be reinstated as a standalone body and that particular legislation to be reversed. because you asked the question, reasonably so, whether or not the ECJ is hesitant in speaking because you don't want to seem to be siding with either political party. So food for thought.
Thank you for that, Mikkel. In our last 2 minutes, I will simply give our response to the trivia question. Our trivia question was, which legislation speaks to plea negotiations or plea bargaining, essentially? Plea bargaining, and that would affect or that would improve the way how our delays could happen here in Jamaica. The winner for that was It's Kimi Possible. The legislation was the Plea Negotiations Act.
And I'm advocating for others. What about the Criminal Justice Administration Act?
Yes, so we still have the Criminal Justice Administration Act that does have a
The 50%
discount for pleas. Let me look back at the.
So we have to give anybody else who answers. So you guys have 2 credit to issue out this week.
Okay, all right.
No, covered in a half a response, correct response.
All right, so we'll accept both answers. So the Criminal Justice Administration Act and the Plea Negotiations Act.
Yes, and you remember that was a big one for us when we were doing the mandatory minimum, trying to figure out,
how they would interact. Yes, but there are 2 different schemes. We can maybe do a little discussion about pleas and so on in a future episode.
Yeah. All right, so that's where we're going to leave it for today. So that was Let's Start Justice. Keep your comments coming respectfully so you can come on our social media platform and you can voice them in a respectful manner, and we will engage for those who have some concerns. Jay, not looking so enthused with that statement.
No, man, it's perfectly fine. I'm perfectly happy to respond to misconceptions about the important work that the organization will continue to do.
All right, thank you so much. Have a good day. My name is Mikkel Jackson.
And I'm Jade Williams.
Justice, the people's champion. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Out of many, we are one in a Jamaica. Make it a better place for the boys and girls. Created equal by the creator. For equal rights and opportunities. No to unlawful detention and police brutalization. Class, gender, race or religion. We not tolerate discrimination.
To join the fight against injustice, contact us at 755-4524 or JamaicансForJustice.org.
The people's champion.
Nationwide 90 FM will be broadcasting live from the National Achievement Expo on Wednesday, April 16 from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Join us at the main stage, Denby 4-H Centre in Clarendon, for a premier youth and agricultural event celebrating innovation and leadership. Under the theme, Youth in Agriculture, Shaping the New Face of Food. The expo highlights the outstanding achievements of Jamaica's youth in agriculture, home economics, and environmental stewardship. Come and see the youths of Jamaica who will be steering agriculture in the right direction. That's a live outside broadcast at the main stage, Denby 4-H Centre in Clarendon, Wednesday, April 16. It's the National Achievement Expo. Catch the live stream on Nationwide's YouTube channel at Nation.